It's Baxie's musical podcast.
Hey, everybody, it's Bax, and welcome back to Baxie's musical podcast. I hope you're in the mood for an amazing story about a guy whose career will blow you away. My guest tonight is Steve Conte. Now, get a load of this. When the New York Dolls broke up in 1976, after years of horrible luck, drug addiction, tragedies, and terrible management, most people assumed that would be the end of that. That wasn't until 2004 when Morrissey of the Smiths was able to convince the surviving members of the band to reunite and perform for the first time in 28 years. That was 12 years after the death of drummer Jerry Nolan, 13 years after the death of guitar player Johnny Thunders, and yet somehow Morrissey was able to convince David Johansen, Syl Sylvain, and the ailing Arthur Killer Kane to get back together. But to do that, David Johansen insists that he handpick the other musicians, and one of them happened to be singer, songwriter, and guitar player Steve Conte. Steve would play with the New York Dolls for the next 6 years, longer than the original lineup existed back in the early 70s. Steve Conte's career would take him through a number of absolutely incredible freaking moments, playing with Chuck Berry, Paul Simon, Peter Wolf, Billy Squier, and then also the Michael Monroe Band. But he's also released a number of fantastic solo records that have been released on Wicked Good Records, the label owned by Little Steven Van Zandt from the E Street Band. This includes his 2021 solo record, the incredible Bronx Cheer, which brings me to why I wanted to talk to Steve Conte. Steve is currently working on a brand new solo record in which he has recorded 5 songs that he co-wrote with Andy Partridge of XTC. It was at that point where I said, I must find me some Steve Conte, and I must speak to him immediately. And so I have. This is my conversation with the insanely talented Steve Conte on Baxie's musical podcast.
Hey.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
All right, man. I'm so sorry about that.
Oh,
Are you recording? Are you recording already?
Yeah, we're ready to go. We're ready to go. Don't you worry about a thing. Are you
All
kidding?
right. I want to get my apology off camera.
Okay.
So your audience doesn't think I'm a flake.
Don't you? I don't think you have to worry about it. Listen. I'm as of today. I'm on vacation, so I'm here all day long. I got all the time for you in the world. Good to see you.
Good man. Yeah, good to see you. Sorry again about that, but yeah, I got no excuse. Except that I have 2 kids.
Hey, I got 3 kids. I know exactly what you're dealing with. You lose track of time. Shit happens. That's okay. I'm so excited to talk to you today. I really am. I've been listening to Bronx Cheer for a better part of about a week and a half now.
Good.
What a great record that is. I can totally see why Little Steven has you on his record label. It's that kind of garagey, great rock record that I totally see him enjoying the hell out of.
Good. Well, that's where I'm at these days. I've made all kinds of records in my career, but I've made like singer-songwritery records, Americana, garagey, trashy ones, and Andy Partridge really liked Bronx Cheer, which is kind of I know that's where we're going with this conversation, but it's got something that I think garage rock people like, but it's also got something for the more attuned ear, shall we say, the more sophisticated ear. There's little secret stuff in there that you don't really notice, on first listen, but when you dig a little deeper, you'll find there's some little complexities in there.
Well, that's definitely true, and I do want to talk about the Andy thing because I'm a huge Andy Partridge fan. But the more I'm reading about your career and about what you've done, your whole career has been kind of dictated by a bunch of holy shit moments. I mean everything from Paul Simon and the Michael Monroe Band and the New York Dolls, and then this thing with Andy Partridge, which for people who don't know, you're putting together your next solo record, and you've written 8 songs with Andy, 5 of which are being recorded. tell me how you connected with him and how this even began, because he's usually very selective in who he chooses to collaborate with. He doesn't do it a lot, and when he does, it does it because it's something really interesting or special to him. So tell me how this begins.
Dude, I pinch myself all the time. I go, why would he want to write with me? But I mean, I'm not disparaging myself too much, but I mean, I've heard his collaborations. I mean, he writes with some great people, Robin Hitchcock.
Hmm.
Who else? This guy Mike Keneally, who was in Zappa's band. So he certainly doesn't have to, and he doesn't have to do it to like, I'm not his friend. He's doing me a favor or anything. He must really like something about me. So I'll take that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'll take
I've
yeah.
I've talked to Robin Hitchcock and Keneally and Thomas Walsh of Pug Wash, another guy he's written a couple songs with,
Right.
and I've even talked to Colin Moulding and Dave Gregory and to Andy. So I've kind of covered all the bases with this band. But one of the things that seems to come out, especially with people who have worked with him closely, is that to work with him and to observe how he creates music. I mean, you're dealing with like a different kind of genius there. There's something going on with him. So, like you said, if he sees something in your talent, it speaks volumes about the talent you have. So, I mean, I just can't even imagine what it's like to sit there across from him, even if it's on a Zoom call, and create with this guy.
Dude, it's unbelievable. I mean, for me, first of all, since 1982, when I first heard English Settlement, I've been XTC junkie.
Yeah.
Every B side, every record, and yeah, I heard "Melt the Guns" on my college radio. You know Matt Pinfield?
I do.
So Matt Pinfield was a DJ at my college radio. He went to Rutgers University in New Brunswick, where I was going, and I had given Matt my first demo to play on the radio, and like he spun my first, record, my first, recorded, whatever. That was demo tapes, basically. So that I'd listen to his station or his show all the time to see if he'd play my song again, right?
Right.
But then one he played it, and I was like, "What's this?" And I'd heard XTC before, like my college buddies would blast like drums and wires, and Black Sea, coming out of the dorm rooms, and I didn't get it yet.
Yeah.
When I heard "Melt the Guns," it was like I heard that sophistication. I heard the weird chords. Some of the stuff got lost in the big noisy tracks. But of course, I went back and I learned to love everything after that. And yeah, so that was once I got English Settlement, and to me it was like finding a new Beatles. It had all the different vibes and styles. It was rock and roll, and then it was weirdness, and then it was ballads, and and they all existed on the same record. And that's like the White Album for me. It's like, why can't every band have an album like that in their career? And well, XTCs, and I'm always trying to make all my records like that, which is a marketing nightmare. But I grew up with Revolver being my favorite record, so
Yeah.
it was never a stretch to have a string quartet and a weird ass backwards tape loop, Book of the Dead prayer, on the same record, So yeah, so then anyway, I went down the next decades just loving XTC and getting all the records, of course, and writing songs that along with influenced by Beatles and Stones and Kinks and whatever. There was some XTC influence in my stuff. And Andy had heard, so this is the 80s, right? So fast forward to like 2000, early 2000s. My guitar repairman, this guy Dennis Fano, who built guitars called Fano Guitars.
Yep.
Now he sold the company. He's got a new company called Novo. he was building Andy basically a copy of his daughter's little nylon string that he used to write all his stuff with. And so Dennis was building Andy a guitar, and when I found that, I went, "You're working with Andy Partridge? Are you kidding me?" And my brother and I had just done a record called The Contes, Bleed Together, and it was pretty eclectic and weird. There was some weird stuff on it, and beautiful ballads. It was not unlike a White Album or English Settlement, to me, in my mind anyway. And so I said, "Would you please pass this record along to Andy?" And I don't believe we actually communicated, but I heard through Dennis that Andy liked the record, and I guess he was just getting his label started. He didn't. Years later, he told me, it was a great record, but I didn't have my label together yet. Blah blah blah. And then, years went by. I may have. I don't know if I somehow. I think I didn't get in touch with him again until I realized he was on Twitter, and I became friends with Steve Lillywhite, the producer.
The producer, yeah.
Bars and Black Sea. We had met at a party, and we became really close friends, and we would hang out all the time. And so one day, he and I are chatting on Twitter, bantering back and forth, and we somehow rope Andy into this conversation. And I'm like, we start talking with us, and then it comes out that I was in the New York Dolls, and Andy was like, "What? You were in the New York Dolls? This is the same Steve Conte that did that record that I liked back then?" And he's like, "Oh my God, I wanted to be a New York Doll." He says, "I even wrote David Johansen a letter. I was going to change my name and my image and everything." And so once he learned that I was in the Dolls, I think there was a whole new level of respect. And then we chatted a bit back and forth, and then it somehow came out that I was going to be touring with Michael Monroe with Alice Cooper, and we were going to play in Swindon, so where Andy's from.
Right.
And so he writes, "I hear you're going to be in my shithole town. I'll take you to lunch." And I was like, "What?" Like immediate screenshot, that like Andy Partridge is offering to take me to lunch. Okay, pinch me, right? But I tell you, that day he came and picked me. We did the sound check. He came to the parking lot of the arena in Swindon. It was called the Oasis. I think where Oasis got their band name from, actually. Picked me up there. We went back to his engineer Stu Rowe's place at the shed where they did all their projects together. And we hung out all day, played guitars. We never played guitars together, but we passed the guitar between us. It was like, I was like, "Oh, show me Scarecrow People." "Oh, okay." And then I would do a lick, and "Oh, show me that lick," and watch YouTube videos, cry. It was just like hanging out with an old friend.
Yeah.
And, it's really weird because, to me, my top 5 songwriters are, Lennon McCartney and teams, Lennon McCartney, Jagger, Richards, Pete Townsend, Paul Westerberg, Andy Partridge.
Yep. It's funny, when I interviewed him, he had just come off a pretty lousy interview with the Rolling Stone magazine. He wasn't happy with it at all, and the guy was just ready to talk and ready to unload. And I finished the interview with the guy, and I've never done in 30 years of interviewing people, I've never done this. I finished the interview and I just sat there and didn't move for like 5 minutes and just said, "Did I just do what I just thought I did? Did I just talk to that guy?" And he really opened up, and it was like, man, it was just a phenomenal experience. And I would imagine that as a songwriter, to be in that position with him just had to be a massive thrill in a career of massive thrills.
Well, yeah, and I'd say this is in my top 5 career moments. It's like playing with Chuck Berry is still number 1.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that a little bit.
I got to play a whole evening with Chuck Berry. It was incredible.
Wow.
I'll tell you about that later. But between that and all the hoopla around being in the New York Dolls, the first reformed gig at the Royal Festival Hall, where just tons of Mick Jones and Chrissy Hind, and everyone was backstage there, like going, you were great. You took over for the Thunders. I was like, okay, I don't know what I did, because I wasn't really a Johnny Thunders fan, but I guess people like what I did.
Yeah.
But between those two things, and getting my first record deal with a major label, and it's right up there. It's top 5 moments of life.
With this new record, and like I said, like we said, there's 5 songs that are going to be recorded on this new thing. Prairie Prince is helping you from the Tubes. He had a long-standing history with Todd Rundgren, who I know Andy loves that guy. But
oh yeah.
When do you expect this thing to be completed? Is this something that's going to come out early next year, or what's the time frame?
Probably not early next year, but hopefully by the summer, because I end up writing summer songs. I don't know why, and or I end up putting them on records, and this one's no different.
Yeah,
I had 2 summer songs on the last record. So there's a summer song that I hope is going to be my summer single. I mean, when I approached Andy, that's how I approached it. I'll circle back to how we got to working on this. So anyway, hopefully it's gonna. We cut the tracks with Prairie last week. My brother and I, my brother on bass, and really connected as a power trio. He was so great to work with, Prairie, and just immediate, like friends, like we'd known each other for like forever. I mean, it was that way when I talked to him on the phone the first time. So, and I knew he was the guy to, I mean, first of all, when I first heard Earn Enough for Us, I rewound, me and my brother sat in the car as like cassette came out in like 1986 or whatever it was. We sat there in the car, we rewound that tape 12 times and listened to that song 12 times in a row.
One of my favorites.
Greatest thing I've ever heard, besides the lyrics, the melodies, the production, the little guitar parts. Prairie's drumming and the drum sound is phenomenal. And when he said, I have the Earn Enough for Us snare drum and I'm bringing it to New York, I flew him to New York. So he lives in San Francisco. So it was either I go out there or get him here. It was easier to get him here and play with my brother and me and record in little Steven's studio where I can get some good deals. So we recorded 5 of the 8 songs. Really, the other 3, 2 of them aren't really finished, and the third of that group just didn't kind of fit in the end. But it'll wind up somewhere. Like I told Andy, there's no way I'm going to write a song with Andy Partridge and it's never going to come out. So let me circle around to how I got. So we started. So after, so that day, Andy picks me up in the parking lot, right? We go, we do the hang all day. It's brilliant, beautiful. I go back, I play my show with Michael Monroe. And then Alice Cooper calls me up on stage and I play Schools Out with Alice Cooper. So it was like one of the greatest.
God, that's great.
Right?
That's great.
So, and then, years go by, this is 2015. So, 7 years go by and, I'd sent Andy my Bronx Cheer record, which he gave me great reviews for. And I'm sure that had something to do with it. He knew what I was capable of. So when I approached him and I said, earlier this year, I said, God, I'd love, I started listening to these interviews that Andy had done about his failed songwriting career, compilation, right? And I thought, how could these people write songs with Andy Partridge and then not release them? The nerve.
I know.
So I approached him and I said, Andy, how would you, in an email, I said, how would you like to write my next single with me for Wicked Cool Records? And he's like, well, Steve, I sort of swore off writing with other people, but it's not a no. And I went, well, that's hopeful. Okay. So I let him sit. I let it sit for a month. And I came up with this track and I thought this would be a good one for him to write with me. And I sent him a track, and I said, "Hey, have you done any more thinking about writing?" And I said, "Here's a track that I'm working on," and I thought it was something he could really sink his teeth into. It was kind of XTC-ish, and he wrote back. He said, "I can't really do anything with this. It's too far along already." So he goes, "Let's just start something from scratch." He goes, "Shall we do a Zoom?" And I was like, so, you know, I'm always very respectful. I don't want to overstep and like,
Sure.
I'm appreciative of him and his time, and so I didn't want to push anything too hard. So when he suggested the Zoom, I was like, yes, absolutely. And because I thought maybe I'd send him something and then he'd send, and we'd just email. So we did a 2-hour Zoom.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
2 hours Zoom. And like within the first 10 minutes, I went, "Oh shit, I guess I should start recording this, right?" And he's like, "Oh no." He actually said to me, "You should be recording this in case you forget." And I said, "Oh, would you be okay with that?" And so I recorded the whole thing. Unfortunately, I didn't know how to do the split screen, so I have 2 hours of Andy Partridge's face, which is perfect. I don't need my face. So I went through that 2-hour Zoom after we got done, and I brought in one idea, he brought in one idea, and then we came up with two on the spot.
Amazing.
And yeah, and then we spent the next 6 months. I took them away and I did like demos with them, and I'd send him the track, and he'd go, "Well, this part could be better, or we need to change that lyric, or you need a better melody here, or a better bass line," or it was a real collaborative thing. He's almost like producing the demos with me, which I'm gonna give him some credit for that on the album. And then so I played the songs for Little Steven, and I didn't, it's hard to read him sometimes because I also, didn't have a conversation. It was through an email. I'd sent him the tracks, and he was like, "Yeah, this one song is cool, great solo," and I was like, "Okay." I didn't know that he was hearing them as anything that could be a single, right? So next time I talked to Andy, I said, "Yeah," I said, "I played the songs for Steven." He was asking what does Van Zandt think. I said, "Yeah, he liked it." I said, "I'm not sure. Maybe it's not garage. Maybe it's too smart or too slick or weird or something." I rarely hear XTC on Underground Garage, so I thought, I said, maybe we need to put on your Dukes of the Stratosphere hat, and let's write some real '60s garage band stuff." And he's like, "You want to do another Zoom?" I said, "Yes, of course." Andy invited me to do another Zoom, and we did another like 2-hour, couple of 40-minute Zooms, and we came up with 4 more songs.
That's great.
Two of which were recorded. So I recorded 3 from the first batch and 2 from this new batch. So
Well,
that's like a whole side of a record. So I'm already like thinking about how to sequence this record, and I think don't hold me to it, but I think side 1 it could open with all 5 Partridge Conte tunes. And by the way, Andy insists that I put my name first. I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, it just flows better." He says, "Partridge, it sort of stops, it stops the flow. Partridge Conte, just put Conte Partridge."
Wow.
Okay. So yeah, I think the first 5 songs on the record could be the Conte Partridge, the cartridge.
The
songs.
cartridge. Well, I can't wait to hear it. I really can. It's funny that you and I connected late last week. I literally just finished watching that Arthur Kane documentary that came out, that New York Doll. I've probably seen it like 3 or 4 times because I just think it's just so cool to see how Arthur in his final years finally gets to do what he had been dreaming of doing forever, and that's to get to the New York Dolls back in 2004. How did you get involved in that reunion when they just finally decide when Johansson and Sylvain and Arthur finally decided to get back together? How was your name approached in that?
Well, I think it was only Johansson that had to agree to do it because, those guys would have done it years ago, Sil and Arthur. That was their whole life. David had his solo careers, he had his acting, he had his the Buster
Poindexter
Poindexter
thing, yeah.
He had his Harry Smith's, the acoustic blues thing. So David had just started, he was like playing around New York for years and he, knew a bunch of great musicians. He was in a band with Levon Helm and Hubert Sumlin from Howlin' Wolf and Jimmy Vivino. And he asked Jimmy, the guitar player in the Conan band, right, with Max, he asked him, who should I call? And both Jimmy and Larry Saltzman, the guitar player in the Harry Smiths, both said to him, I got the guy for you. Don't call anyone else. Conte's the guy. He's got the right look, the right guitars, the right attitude. And so David called me and, just based on recommendations from respected musicians in New York City. And we got together for lunch and sat down over half a cantaloupe. And, and then at the end, we were just talking about all kinds of stuff. And at the end, we didn't play a note of music. At the end, he just handed me an envelope, a manila envelope. He's like, I took the liberty of making you these charts and tunes. You want to do this gig? And I was like, okay. And that was it. Never rehearsed. And I walked into the first rehearsal and David wasn't there. It was Sil and Arthur. And they met the new guy in their band, which was probably kind of weird for them.
Right.
Because David picked me and he picked the drummer and he picked the piano player. And I guess that's how it had to be. In order for David to do this, he had to pick his guys because he had been used to like playing with great musicians in New York City for whatever 30 years, and he wasn't sure how Sil and Arthur were going to perform. I mean, they were great in the end, but he had no idea. So he had his like musical director, kind of piano player there, just to crack the whip if he had to. But everybody did great. And the second day, David came in, and we put it all together, and then we went over to England and did those shows, and it was another, pinch me moment.
Well, that's the whole story of that band is like, it's an amazing story. It's tragic. It's sad. It's like you wonder what would have happened if they had, been a little bit healthier, if they had been not so mismanaged towards the end. It just to see those guys, play and to know what that first album, meant to people. I mean, you talked about, Andy's, love of that album. I mean, Morrissey put that show together. Arthur comes back. It's like there's a lot of real feel good moments about the idea that suddenly the New York Dolls are back and they sound freaking fantastic. And I mean, that had to be really pretty powerful especially for those guys to come back after all that time and play.
Yeah, and like David said once, you can only be an amateur once, So, but he was saying that in regards to like, the band sounding better than ever, these days because, he pulled some ringers in like myself and the drummer and, we made and ultimately when Sammy came in. But we energized the band and gave it that, millennium sheen, I guess.
Yeah.
It was like guys, because when the Dolls had made their first record, nobody had ever made a record before in that band. It was their first album ever, and now everyone had made so many records by that point. David had made solo records, Sil had made solo records, Arthur had made solo records. I had made records. We all did. So when you get together with guys who've been recording for 20 years, 30 years, it's going to be better than, better. It's not going to have the vibe of the original first Dolls album. It's like, you can't match that vibe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a moment in time and substances and everything else. And, what was going on, the stories I hear. And, when we did the record with Todd Rundgren, of course, I heard all the stories about those sessions. Todd was like, well, some guys were on, up drugs and some guys were on down drugs. And we had to like, find when they were like balanced in the middle and then we'd hit record. Just when one guy was coming down and one guy was coming up, okay, press record.
You
So
you mentioned that the number one thrill of all of these things that have happened to you was the Chuck Berry moment. Tell me about that. That had to be unbelievable too.
well, yeah, and that kind of goes into the Dolls thing. Is, you know, people say, how could you take Johnny Thunder's place? I didn't take his place. You know, well, he's not around, so
He's not available.
I sat in for him, whatever, however you want to say it. There was no replacing him, but I did the guitar. I played the part of the guitar player. But I figured, I never listened to Thunders, but when I heard him, when I started studying those records, because I had Too Much Too Soon, but I didn't have the first album,
Hmm.
and I never listened to them when I was growing up much. Um, but I heard Thunders, and I was like, he just loves Chuck Berry and he loves Keith Richards, and so do I. So to me, that was the connecting, the connective tissue
Right.
was Chuck Berry and Keith Richards. And I figured, if I approach it with that head and turn the amp up all the way, that's Thunders.
But
So
it's funny you say that because I was like I've always loved the Heartbreakers album, the LAMF, and I always said that the Heartbreakers are like what the Rolling Stones would be if the Rolling Stones had unsolvable drug problems. And it's true. He did sound an awful lot like Keith Richards at that back then.
yeah, so um, between those two players, that kind of got me in the Thunder's head, my version of it, and so the first guitar player, the first solo I ever learned was Johnny B. Good when I was 13. I've been taking lessons out of the books, like reading the little notes, and it was fucking boring as hell. And one day, somebody showed me the pentatonic scale, and a little bit of Johnny B. Good solo, and I went to town, man, and I just taught myself those kind of licks all over the neck, and I was just that kind of kid. I would teach myself. I would learn something, and then I'd just go put it through every permutation, every fret, every string, every key, and so knowing that Chuck Berry was my first influence and my first solo, when I got this call to like play with Chuck, I was like, this is like too crazy, man. It was kind of the first really big thing that happened to me. I'd been on the road a little bit with band called Blood, Sweat, and Tears, who you might remember.
Hmm.
That was like my first road gig, but I hadn't had a record deal yet for my own music. I hadn't, I had a blues band. We were playing in New York every night, every week, and having great people come and sit in with us. But this was different, playing with Chuck Berry. So the promoter at the Meadowlands, where he was going to play this concert, knew my mom, who was a jazz singer. This guy was a trumpet player, and he put the band together. He told Chuck, he picked Chuck up from the airport, and Chuck says, "Who's my band tonight?" And Chuck says, "Oh, Chuck, you're gonna love it. It's a great band. It's the Conte brothers, John on bass, and Steve on guitar." He said, "Guitar? I don't use no other guitar player." And, and the promoter says, "No, Chuck, Steve's great, man. Don't worry. He'll lay way back, if you need him to." And Chuck says, "I'm gonna give him one song, and if he ain't happening, I'm gonna throw him off the stage." So I was told this right before we went on, no pressure. And Chuck comes backstage, and we all knew the records, of course, and he gave us some instructions. He said, drummer, watch my foot. Bass player, watch my neck. If I do something that means that's how I want you to play, and he says, and listen to the lyrics. If it wasn't for the lyrics, we'd be playing the same song all night long. And so we get out there, and I'm like laying way back because I'm not going to get thrown off the stage with Chuck Berry. I waited too long for this moment. So we play a bunch of, the hits, whatever, Sweet Little 16 and Memphis and Oh Carol, and then he does a slow blues. He does It Hurts Me Too, and comes to the it gets to the end when things go wrong with you. It hurts me too. Points to me. Take a solo. I'm like, oh, not only did he not throw me off the stage, he's giving me a solo. I play his blues solo, and he says to the audience, the man can play. Can the man play? Take another one. Gives me another solo.
Wow.
Then we go and we play a bunch more Chuck songs, and then we do another slow blues. Same thing. Gives me a solo. Can the man play? Take another one. I'm like, man, this is too cool, And then the next song he calls is Johnny Be Good, and he plays the opening riff. He goes ba da da bat. Right when he plays that very first lick, when he goes pop. His high E string pops right off, and I'm like, you really need that string to play that middle solo that's coming up.
Right.
I'm already thinking ahead to the middle. I'm like, what is going to happen when it comes to the middle solo? And he goes, Johnny Be Good. Points to me. I'm like, first solo I ever learned in my life, playing it with the man who
wrote it. Wow.
Who wrote it, who created this guitar style, who invented guitar rock and roll pretty much. Pinch me again, so.
That's great.
Yeah.
So after you leave the Dolls, you get involved with the Michael Monroe band, and I just read that that someone's going to finally do a documentary about his life called "The Best Kept Secret in Rock and Roll," and he really is kind of one of those guys that some people may know, but they may not really know what Michael Monroe is all about. Tell me about what that experience has been like. I mean, you've been with him for, I think it's like a dozen years or so.
12 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, aren't we all the best kept secrets in rock and roll? anyone who's not a household name who's been out there slunging it out and performing and writing songs and making records this long, it's got to be some kind of secret. So yeah, I mean that was a kind of a no-brainer move over from the Dolls because Sammy was, of course, Sammy Yaffa was in the Dolls after Arthur died, and he was originally in Hanoi Rocks with Michael.
Yep.
So he had started. The Dolls played in Finland, in Michael's hometown of Turku, in 2009. Michael came up and played sax with us on Personality Crisis, and I met him that night. And he'd lived in New York when I first moved to New York, but we never met back then. It's like I never crossed paths with Thunders or Michael or Sammy or even Sylvain back then. I don't know. We were all going to the same clubs and playing the same venues. So it's kind of weird that we never crossed paths. But I guess they started formulating a plan to make some new music together, the two of them, and the Dolls' work was slowing down a bit, and Sammy said, "Hey, you want to do some gigs with Michael?" And I was like, "Sure, I can do both." So I started playing with Michael and with the Dolls at the same time, and then it turned out that we wrote some songs, and we were all scheduled to go in and start making a record with Jack Douglas. And then the Dolls manager called and said, "Hey, we're gonna go make a new record." And I said, "Oh, really? With what songs?" Because we, up till then, the two Dolls records we'd done, we had all written together.
Right.
And I didn't hear anything about, we're gonna start writing or anything. All of a sudden, we're going to record a new record. And I guess it was songs that David and Syl had written, which was fine, but the problem was the date of the Dolls album recording was the exact same date as the Michael recording. And we were set up to record September 10th in Los Angeles with Jack Douglas, and they were set up to record September 10th in Blackpool, England, with some other producer. And I was like, I can't do it. Can you reschedule? No. Okay, so that was that.
That was that. Yeah.
They got whoever Frank and Fonte from Blondie played, and the producers, the bass players, Jason Hill from Louis XIV, he played bass, and I just kind of moved over to Michael, and been there ever since. I don't have a job, so this is my job. I've always had like some kind of day job, like with music.
Right.
But back in the '90s, it was like doing session work, and in '80s, '90s, it was doing session work in New York City, and then in the 2000s, going out on the road. I toured with Billy Squier and Willie DeVille and Paul Simon with Paul Simon. That was another pinch me moment.
I bet. I bet it was. Tell me about that a little bit.
Um, yeah, so I had played. My brother and I had this band, Crown Jewels, and we made a record called Linoleum. It was very, in typical style all over the place, but kind of more of a singer songwriter. But there was some like nice rocking moments on it. But there's one song that has a viola or cello rather on it, and this guy Mark Stewart, a friend of ours from New York, he started working with Paul Simon, and for some reason he thought I would be good because I sang really soft on that song. I wasn't like my usual belted out rock voice, and for some reason he heard that and he thought, hey, Paul wants a singer to sing for him during rehearsals when he doesn't feel like singing or when he can't sing, wants to take a rest or whatever. So he recommended me, and I went down there, and I don't remember if I just got the gig. I think I just got the gig. I didn't even think there was an audition or anything. and like they sent me, the Paul Simon soundbook, all the CDs, all the solo records, all the sheet music, books, and I just walked in there with, I had my music stand, my mic stand, the Paul Simon, songbook, and I just had to be at the ready. And some days we'd do like 10-hour rehearsal days, and some days it was with this great 12-piece 15-piece band with the African guys, the EDM bass, and Steve Gadd on drums.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, horns and everything. It was amazing. And whenever he didn't want to sing, or he'd go like, Steve, I got an interview, Bridge Over Troubled Water, you take it.
Okay, I'll take the song that's most difficult to sing. Sure, that's no
Yeah,
problem. Yeah. Wow.
Mrs. Robinson, or like songs I grew up with. I mean, these are the songs before the Beatles, or no, not before the Beatles. Around the time, it was for me growing up in my house, because my parents were jazz fans. Really, we didn't have much pop music, so it was like what we heard on the radio, and what friends of theirs would bring over. Their friends are the ones who brought over Revolver. My parents didn't have any Beatles records.
Yeah.
They had Fitzgerald and Miles Davis and Billie Holiday and Wes Montgomery. But so I think one of the first albums they bought was Simon and Garfunkel Bookends. So I knew all those songs, and then so when Paul put together Simon and Garfunkel again, also a few years later, he called me for that. And whenever some days Art didn't come to rehearsal, till later, and me and Paul would do Scarborough Fair, like Simon and Conte. And then some days Paul wouldn't show up, and it would be Conte and Garfunkel, doing Sounds of Silence or something. Geez, man,
unbelievable. That's crazy. We started off talking about your songwriting career, and what you did with your last record, and what you're doing now with Andy. I was listening to a podcast interview that you had done talking about your own songwriting, and one of the stories you told is that you started writing songs at a ridiculously early age, like 10. Most people don't do that at 10 years old, but you always hear like you got to do the 10,000 hours before you really start understanding the craft of stuff. And even as you're saying, like your own writing, and on the last record, there's some sophisticated moments just in the writing of those songs. Tell me about how you kind of approach your own songwriting, because I mean you're talking about an incredible gift that you were able to kind of adapt as a child. That's really, it's pretty extraordinary.
Oh, well, I never thought about it really. It just
Because at 10 years old, I was making fart jokes. I mean, that's what I was doing at 10 years old.
Nobody told me I couldn't. So, I mean, I was actually, so after I heard Revolver when I was 6, I wanted to be Ringo. So I started taking drum lessons. Excuse me, I have to open my window. It's really hot in here. I started taking drum lessons when I was 7, and I played drums up until, and my brother was the guitar player. So my brother had a guitar, and I didn't even have a full kit. I just had like a snare and a hi-hat, and eventually, I built the kit up piece by piece. But one day, 4 years after I'd been playing drums, I picked up his guitar, and I just I didn't have a pick. I just started this is the first song I ever wrote.
Yeah.
And playing it just like that with my fingernail. And I started singing these melodies along with like a single note. And I was like, man, I can write songs. I said, I shouldn't be a drummer anymore. I can't be stuck behind the drum kit. I have to get out in front. So, then once I started playing guitar, I started taking guitar lessons, and I just zoomed, I was a natural. And then my brother said, hey, screw this, I'm switching to bass. Which he's a natural at bass. So we both found our instruments at a really young age. And I just kept going. I just kept writing and copying Beatles, of course, writing psychedelic drug songs when I had never done a drug in my life, but of course I was 10. I was writing acid sounding, acid trip songs. And we made our first album in our family living room when I was 10 or 11, and I got to tell you, some of those songs really hold up. There was innocence and naivete, simplicity, but you can hear that it wasn't like Moon June Spoon, crappy kid rhymes. Some of them were really good. In fact, one of those songs ended up on that album, Crown Jewels Linoleum, I was mentioning before, a song called Peace. I put the actual recording from when I was 10 years old on that record, and you can find it probably on YouTube or anywhere, Apple or Spotify. So yeah, and then then you learn a bunch and you get worse.
Because you know too much.
Yeah. And then I took, I learned all the fancy chords and everything. I tried to use those in my writing, and I tried to use, fancy riffs, and eventually I came all the way back around to the blues and Beatles, after all the education, and just started trying to write simple songs again. And but I'm always trying to stick in something a little weird, a little that your average, Johnny Ramone couldn't play,
Right.
It's you can play the power chord stuff, and and it's challenging to write a good song like that for sure. I'm not taking anything away from that simplicity, but I will take that as a basis and then fuck it up somehow later. Put some weird notes in the chords or something.
Well, it's cool to have heard your first song. I'm actually looking forward to seeing what your next few songs are with Andy, and it sounds really exciting. I can't wait to hear how those songs sound. I'm sure they're going to be unbelievable.
Me too.
Yeah.
The tracks are already sounding amazing with Prairie Prince.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Say, Steve, I appreciate you taking the time today. I know that we got kind of jacked up with time, but it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I wish you all the luck in the world. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Baxie.
Take care.
And thanks, everybody. If you want to find me online, steveconte.com, and I'm on all the usual social medias, your Twitters, your Instagrams, your Facebooks, your whatever.
Yep.
Bandcamp is where Little Steven will release my next record. You can find all my stuff there too as well, and I have signed copies that I that go from my band camp, but the digital stuff goes from Wicked Cool Records at Steven's company. So yeah, find me.
Will
I'll write
do.
back.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate
right.
it. Take care. Again, the new record should be coming out later this year with all those songs co-written by fricking Andy Partridge. Be sure to check out Steve's album, Bronx Cheer. It is a great record, too. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it, share it, tell all your friends about it. You can reach me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. And thanks again for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.